You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
These are the headlines for the news today, Wednesday, the 4th of April. UK could face Al-Qaeda threat from Africa. Surgery bans elderly patient over her carbon footprint. Vicar behind bars for immigration fraud. Fuel leak worries as tanker runs aground in North Wales beach. A French politician found naked and dead in New York. Suicide bomb in Mogadishu kills 6. Huge bounty for founder of Pakistani terror group. Romney won 3 primaries yesterday. Thought for the day, death in our own homes. UK news. The UK could face an Al-Qaeda threat from Africa. The Defence Management Journal reports that the Royal United States Services Institute Valentina Soria is warning that new terrorist threats could be faced as Al-Qaeda regroups and re-energises and exploits regional instability in Saharan and sub-Saharan Africa. With attacks on UK citizens already having taken place in Kenya and Nigeria, Valentina has said direct terrorist attacks inside the UK could be provoked by the dynamics of jihadism in Africa. She further warns of the potential for radicalisation and mobilisation of a new subset of East and West African youth in the UK, with a much greater radicalisation amongst the Somali minority. She states the UK cannot expect to remain immune from the spillover effects of events that could reshape part of the African continent. A surgery bans elderly patient over her carbon footprint. Now, does that take the cake? It has been reported that an elderly woman was ordered to find a new GP because the carbon footprint of her 2-mile round trips to the surgery where she has been treated for 30 years was too large. The West Road Surgery in Westcliff-on-Sea, Essex, wrote to Avril Mackay, 83, telling her to address the green travelling issues over her journeys from her home in Westcliff-on-Sea. Mrs Mackay was told to register with a new GP within 28 days. Mrs Mackay, a grandmother, believes the decision was made because she complained about a doctor. A vicar is now behind bars for 4.5 years for immigration fraud for carrying out 200 illegal weddings between Eastern Europeans and Nigerians so they could stay in Britain. 56-year-old vicar Brian Shipsides obviously put his wallet first and his country last in this scam. The judge in this case, when he passed sentence, told the court that the vicar had put £30,000 in his own pocket. The border agency went through the church records and Shipsides was arrested. His accomplice was an illegal immigrant from Nigeria, aged 32, with 2 children. She got 3 years and 18 months for possessing false identity documents. A cargo ship has run aground off the coast of North Wales. The cargo ship, which found itself in difficulties, had all its crew rescued by emergency services last night. The ship's location off Llandulas was the scene of a dramatic rescue. The people of North Wales are now worried that the fuel tanks on board the vessel have been ruptured and may cause a leak into the sea. Euronews. One of France's leading political figures has been found dead in a hotel in the United States. Richard Descoings, who was 53 years old, was found naked in his hotel room in New York. Descoings was the director of the Paris Institute of Political Studies in France. The investigation is continuing. World news. Mogadishu has been rocked by a suicide bomb. Shabab, Somalia's powerful Islamic group, has claimed responsibility for a female bomber's suicide attack that killed 6. The attack occurred early this morning during a ceremony to mark the reopening of Somalia's national theatre. The attack comes at a time when peace and tranquility in Somalia's capital has been dramatically improving. Hundreds of thousands of Somalis have returned home recently. Their return has helped fuel economic growth, which in turn created jobs, giving hope to the young and drawing many away from violence. A United Nations peacekeeping team is on its way to Syria. They will be arriving in the capital Damascus shortly, reports have said. The peacekeeping team is to make sure that the UN peace plan gets underway and is carried out successfully. The bounty price of a Muslim founder of a Pakistani terror group has been put up to around $10 million. The figure, around £6.2 million, has been raised in the dead or alive deal to get rid of the Lashkar al-Taiba founder member. Mitt Romney, one of the Republican candidates in the race to have a showdown for the presidency against Barack Obama in November, has won in 3 election primaries yesterday. Mr Romney made a clean sweep in the election, sources have said. Thought for the day: death in our own homes? Well, amidst all the mundane news on the slow news week, when all the really important life and state changing items are being hidden from the public, the news is highlighted today by the sentence of a 14-year-old boy for beating his mother to death with a hammer, wrapping her in plastic and setting light to her body. Not to be frivolous, but did she not cook his chips properly? The so-called shattering classes are now to be regaled with the usual whys, wherefores, hows and the final insult and how does this affect you question, which seems to be brought out for everything from an accident to a foul murder. How do you expect people directly affected to feel? I think of the gut reply of, well, how the do you think I feel? Seriously, there are now going to be questions asked, probably even fairly high up the food chain, on why a boy as young as this committed this terrible and unprovoked crime. Now, I know some of my listeners are expecting me to launch into a tirade on immigration and the results of crime figures on the general population, but I'm leaving that for another time. This problem is homegrown. Though heavily fed from Japanese and US computer games industry, this problem is ours and the relations we have with our young. All in all, not good. Of course we have the families one has always had in society, well off, educated, and their children, if they do stray off the given path, usually go back on when the other side does not look so green. Then we have the other side of the coin, which are the increasingly poorer families, single parent if that, drug or alcohol dependent, and yes, sometimes, if not often, mixed race, but in the past just poor white, who for generations regarded the social as their right and alternated between allowing their young to do exactly what they want or beating them up or worse. These families have always been in our society and they always will be, both different ends of the same stick. The main problem is now, apart from a general lack of education in our schools and discipline, couple this with the fact that youngsters have incredible energy and there is nowhere to run it off. Our playing fields, village greens, wasteland or parks are all being swallowed up. In my area, which is fairly rural and boring in Hampshire, there is no cinema, no arcade and no shops except Tesco. Absolutely nothing for anyone over 13 to do, except what? You've guessed it, television and computer games. Our youngsters are also not encouraged to play in playgrounds anymore because of health and safety and the suing culture. Well, I would rather some child takes a tumble and learns from it than he or she goes and beats up a pensioner or worse. Our government and councils may do studies on why some of our youths are turning bad, but it is to some extent their fault. They are the ones who demolish or sell off cinemas and family pubs, greenbelt land, etc. to people who usually replace it with takeaways or mosques or brand new huge supermarkets. What does this message send out to our children? Stay in, buy cheap booze, watch TV, and if you do socialise, do it in front of a computer game. What fun! The thought of going out for a walk or doing homework is now almost totally foreign to most English pupils in our schools or country. If the poor souls have anyone at home when they do have home time, it is a miracle. And this isn't just the poorer homes where a single woman alone has to work. This is general now for upper middle class homes, and it will get worse. My youngest boy was a latchkey child through no fault of my own, but he didn't have it as hard as some poor kids do now. At least he had a garden and books. The computer games business hadn't taken off then, and children's TV was usually Little House on the Prairie. Not exactly a slasher film, was it? Nowadays it is very different, and we have death in our own homes. This 14-year-old boy, Daniel Bartlam, apparently got the idea of using a hammer on his mother from Coronation Street. Am I odd? My children, whatever age, never watched the soaps, even then. That was adult territory and I guarded it well. However, with the use of video rental on the rise in the early 80s, horror films and cut and slash movies were available, but in those days most video machines were in the main living room and parents had some control over what their little darlings watched. Nowadays any form of control is viewed by the PC elite as abuse, which is leading to juvenile crime and mental health problems being on the rise. A Chinese study has shown that there are brain abnormalities in teenagers diagnosed with internet addiction disorder. The average British child now spends 2,000 hours a year peering at a computer screen, whether watching DVDs, television or computer games. There are also terrifying examples of murders inflicted on teens by teens that reflect some of the goriest films ever shown. Two cult films, Driller Killy and I Spit on Your Grave, being the first two, The Saw movies and the porn slasher movies all feature heavily in these murderers' mindsets. On the case of a 17-year-old who was tied to a tree and then set alight, one of his killers remarked on this scene from the film Severance, "Wouldn't it be wicked if you could do that to someone?" Well, he did, and Simon Everett died a painful and a horrible death. The Bulga murder, which must be one of the most terrible in our history, is having the opposite effect. Parents are frightened of sending their children out to play even in their own gardens. Remember the case where a young girl was taken from a tent in her garden and raped and killed? Although the message is clearly "do not take your eyes or your hand away from your child" in a mail, it is tough when your own homes are not safe. The main reason for this is that parents are discouraged from giving their older youngsters a good wallop on the back of their legs when they do something wrong or dangerous. Teachers are afraid of even verbal discipline, and people on the street are getting like the Americans, afraid to draw attention to bad behaviour because of the backlash on them. The death penalty was a deterrent, and although some poor souls did die when they should not have, Ruth Ellis being my personal choice, it should be brought back. Our legal beagles are not so keen because it would give them some brain work to do, not just charge huge amounts of money for very little. It should be brought back for premeditated murder, and this includes child rape and murder, honour killings, killings from Muslim grooming gangs, robbery with intent to kill, and all along those lines. Murders carried out in the heat of the moment, crime passionnel, drunken rages, and where someone has not gone out deliberately to inflict death, should be treated as manslaughter, as they are now, I believe. People who steal cars and drag youngsters underneath them should be hanged. Psychopathic murderers should be treated and locked up forever, but more of that in another World at 8. Our youngsters do not have enough physical action to offset their hormones in most cases. Other sad cases are where the vulnerable teen actually believes he has superpowers or whatever and has no conscience. Why? Because most are not brought up with any form of discipline. All the Roman Catholic child abuse scandals and general child cruelty push the normal barriers of parents and social workers way beyond the norm in the opposite direction. Children in the States can divorce their parents for a minor slap or even verbal abuse. Children are not born with standards or barriers. They come with years of parenting and schools. No longer, I'm afraid. Many of our children are being left to bring themselves up. Financial pressures mean women work all hours, families split up. Add to this the new celeb culture of one baby no man, and we have the framework for a small section of society who are being groomed to kill. I am convinced that a huge amount of post-traumatic stress syndrome that is present in our younger serving men of action is a fairly new condition. I believe it started in the First World War when the machinery of war changed. It changed from horses and men fighting man to man and literally facing their enemy to where you stand and can kill or be killed by someone firing a gun or machine gun who is invisible. When you are blown up it is not face to face, usually. The old days of whaling 6 streets of whatever out of a foe with a broadsword are long gone, and the energy expended in this is what young men need in times of war and stress, not being set up for enemy's target practice and having to be careful of hearts and minds when shooting back. Bring back the swords, my friends, hack away. I may seem a right-wing Luddite, but computers in the age of technology we have been enjoying for nearly 100 years brings great rewards, but it also takes a toll on the human condition. We have been without PCs, laptops, mobile phones, the availability of porn, horror and cruelty on screen for all and sundry at the press of a button for hundreds of years. Whilst I am not suggesting we go back to the Dark Ages, I feel we must honour our future generations, family and the human condition of living life with rules and discipline, if only for the sake of our children and their children in the future. And finally, what a shame. Labour has lost its control of its majority in the Midlothian Council. Labour is being punished by the Scots after being fed up with a party that is fast fading in Scotland. The councillor that caused the major disaster is Jackie Aitchison, who has left Labour and gone independent. Normally if you put a bowl of cornflakes up for candidate in England for the Labour Party, they would vote for it, but in the case of Scotland they have had enough of it. They've gone back to porridge. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I wish you all a very good night. From Mackay, 83, telling her to address the green travelling issues over her journeys from her home in Westcliff-on-Sea. Mrs Mulcahy was told to register with a new GP within 28 days. Mrs Mulcahy, a grandmother, believes the decision was made because she complained about a doctor. A vicar is now behind bars for 4.5 years for immigration fraud for carrying out 200 illegal weddings between Eastern Europeans and Nigerians so they could stay in Britain. 56-year-old vicar Brian Shipsides obviously put his wallet first bars for immigration fraud. Fuel leak worries as tanker runs aground in North Wales beach. A French politician found naked and dead in New York. Suicide bomb in Mogadishu kills 6. Huge bounty for founder of Pakistani terror group. Romney won 3 primaries yesterday. Thought for the day: death in our own homes. UK news. The UK could face an Al-Qaeda threat from Africa. The Defence Management Journal reports that the Royal United States Services Institute Valentina Soria nation amongst the Somali minority. She states the UK cannot expect to remain immune from the spillover effects of events that could reshape part of the African continent. A surgery bans elderly patient over her carbon footprint. Now does that take the cake? It has been reported that an elderly woman was ordered to find a new GP because the carbon footprint of her 2-mile round trips to the surgery where she has been treated for 30 years was too large. The West Road surgery in Westcliff-on-Sea, Essex, wrote to Avril.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. In nationalist news.
These are the headlines for the news today, Wednesday, the 4th of April. UK could face Al-Qaeda threat from Africa. Surgery bans elderly patient over her carbon footprint. Vicar behind bars is warning that new terrorist threats could be faced as Al-Qaeda regroups and re-energises and exploits regional instability in Saharan and sub-Saharan Africa. With attacks on UK citizens already having taken place in Kenya and Nigeria, Valentina has said direct terrorist attacks inside the UK could be provoked by the dynamics of jihadism in Africa. She further warns of the potential for radicalisation and mobilisation of a new subset of East and West African youth in the UK with a much greater radicalisation.